Hey guys, this is Chess Coach Andrew Rankin. Welcome back to another episode of Buffing Your Black Repertoire. Today I wanted to just demonstrate a game that I played featuring the Caro Kann advanced variation. Um, I don't know, I had this weird feeling after I finished that I just felt like I played a perfect game. Computer said I played at a 91% accuracy, so we'll go over a line that I didn't even consider during the game, but the computer actually really likes it. It's good to know that the move that I played um, wasn't the best, but we still had advantage. So without further ado, let's jump in. So the game started with e4, c6, knight to f3, which is a unique move order, but there's nothing wrong with it. It just means after the move d5, our opponent's really going to play one of three variations. He's either going to play um, the exchange variation, he's going to play the advanced variation. I guess I was thinking he could play knight to c3, but maybe d4 there is pretty strong. So I think it just means you're going to go into one of two variations. So he pushed the pawn to e5. I played bishop to f5, and now comes d4. And now we just transpose into a pretty standard advanced variation line. I go e6, and he goes bishop to d3. I think the bishop is better placed on e2, which is called the short variation. The idea is that you're going to use this bishop to harass it later on and gain tempos when you're creating your kingside attack. And I always teach my students that whenever you're able to defend this bishop with a knight, you want to do so. So knight to e7 makes a lot of sense. That way if he takes, we can take with the knight, and we're very happy that we can develop with tempo. So he just castles here, and I continue with putting the knight from the queen side onto the squared d7. He plays bishop to g5, which pins my knight to my queen, which means my knight is no longer defending the bishop, and so now it's time to trade bishops. And here I played the move queen to b6. And I figured the move queen to b6 was just very logical. So we're preparing the move c5. Sorry, queen b6. We prepare the move c5. We're putting pressure on the b2 pawn, and after c5, knight c6, we can even play bishop to e7, or we can potentially take here and then bring the bishop out over here, or do a variation of plans. But here the computer actually gets really aggressive and wants to move h6. And after h6, the computer says that the only move for white to fight for an advantage is to take here, and then we castle, which is very interesting. And I was looking at, well, what happens if he drops back? Then the computer says, all right, slap him in the face with g5. He goes here, and then knight to f5. And now the computer wants knight f to d2 and c5. And you probably noticed here, and the computer wants c4, and the game just gets absolutely crazy. But you probably noticed here after the move c3, and then queen to b6 is that, I mean, this position just looks like a dream position for black. I mean, we're going to put our bishop here, and there's just immense pressure along this diagonal. And really the key is that this piece is just terrible. Like, this bishop is just not going to get into the game. And we don't even have to castle anytime soon, just in case he decides to throw Harry the h-pawn at us. But actually, if he pushes here, he's going to get into pretty big trouble after something like pawn takes and then bishop here. That doesn't look very good for him, because we can always move the king over and then put the rook on the g file. So that's a really interesting variation. Really good to know, because I've gotten this position quite a few times. And I'm pretty sure that I always just play the move queen to b6. So I'm actually going to go back after this game and check out some more lines, because this is really interesting. So queen b6, he plays the move b3. I push the move c5, and the idea is definitely to crack at the center, but also it's because I need to get this knight to a good score so that I can develop my bishop. So he puts the knight here, and I put my knight on c6, and he pushes the move c3, which makes sense. And now I'm not sure, I wasn't sure here if I should rush the bishop trade right away or if I should delay a little bit. And I was hoping that he put a rook here so that after pawn takes, I can put the bishop on a3 and be really annoying. So that's why I played rook to c8. And the idea is that if he brings, let's say, his a rook over, pawn takes, and now bishop a3. If the rook goes, I've seen this happen a lot, and then we castle, and now we're threatening knight to b4, which looks really annoying. I've ended up with a position like this quite a few times, where after knight here, rook takes, knight takes, rook takes, knight takes, something like rook here, h6, and yeah, I think black is just crushing here. Black is +4. I'm sure the evaluation is much higher. So this is kind of what I was hoping for. But instead, after rook to c8, my opponent dropped the bishop back. And now I guess he has ideas of using this x-ray on my queen. I decided to take, and a very common mistake here is that they'll take with the knight. And they think like, oh, look, I got all kinds of discovered attacks, like knight takes e6, but the problem is that we can play knight takes on e5, which hits the queen, and the queen now protects the e6 square, so there are no good discoveries with the knight. Notice if the knight goes like here, we can just take the queen. If he takes our queen, we take back with the pawn or with the knight, and yeah, he's just down a piece here. So that's why he decided to move his queen, and now we need to play the strong move knight to g4. That way there are never any discoveries here, because we always have knight takes bishop, and then if he takes back, because our knight would be attacking the queen, then the queen would have queen takes pawn check, and then wherever he goes might end up being a losing square. So he just puts the knight on f3. I developed the bishop to e7. It's funny, recently I've been questioning whether I should put the bishop on d6 in some positions, or when I'm white, whether I should put the bishop on d3. And then it's funny because every middle game I always end up kicking myself and saying, the bishop just belongs on e2 and e7, particularly with black. With white, a lot of times the bishop is better on d3, but with black, when you end up with this kind of pawn structure, for some reason I just always find the bishop is so well placed on e7. You'll find out in this game he actually is super well placed here as well. And you'll notice it just does a nice job of guarding the g5 square, because the queen and the knights can actually team up very quickly and threaten queen and helper mates on h7. So bishop to e7. And now I got to trade off this knight for the bishop, otherwise he's got all kinds of nasty discoveries. So knight takes, pawn takes, and then we castle. And notice my queen is now doing a really nice job x-raying his king. And this knight is a little bit weak, and so is this pawn. This pawn is pinned to the queen, which means this knight is not always as stable as you'd think. So he continues with rook a to c1. I put the bishop on f6, just putting more pressure along these dark square diagonals. He moves the king off the diagonal, which makes a lot of sense. And now I just prepare to double up the rooks. Notice that the queen is leading the front, which means rook takes is always an option. Now he pushes g4, so clearly my opponent is looking to get very aggressive. I should have just put the rook on c8, threatening rook takes pawn, but I just played the move h6. Super useful move. If he goes here, I can always take with the pawn. And if he takes with the knight, I can always take back with the bishop, even if he has, let's say, an extra defender. Because like here in this position he plays queen to g2, and I just double up, and after he pushes I take with the pawn and he takes with the knight. And now if this knight ever becomes too strong, I can always just trade it off. And so of course we take on c3, rook takes, and now you'll notice that whenever white's attack on the king side starts to get really strong, luckily, black for some reason is always breaking through on the queen side just one tempo earlier than white's attack. So we broke through, we won an extra pawn, we're threatening this, and white is only now really starting his attack. So he pushes the pawn to h4, and I take the pawn on e3. So now this knight is hanging, and it moves to f3, which looks really dangerous because it means that if we ever take this knight, he can take again and threaten things like, if he can ever get a queen to this diagonal, then he can always threaten things on h7. But I really like my next move. I played pawn to d4. And the idea here is that this is the weak diagonal in my opponent's position. It's actually no longer the dark squares where his king usually is. Instead, it's this light square diagonal. And I figured that it would be very useful to activate my queen, who was really lonely over here. Notice the question here is like, how do you get your queen active? I'd love to go here, but then the knight takes. So I played the move d4, which is a very common idea. You just vacate a square for one of your pieces. He moves the queen here, and now we just slide the queen over to c6. And now, when he pushes, well, no, he puts the queen here, and he's threatening queen to h7, which is going to be all kinds of nastiness. Also, he's threatening queen takes f7. So we take the knight, and now, oh no, you can't take back with the knight because it's pinned to the king. So we realized he has to take with the pawn, and now that this piece is pinned, it already has 1-2 attackers. We just put pressure on the pinned piece. Knight to e5, moves the king here, knight takes, rook takes, queen takes, rook takes, king takes, and yeah, we just traded off all the material there, simplified into a nice winning endgame. Now I just have to be careful about this pawn. I'm up 3 pawns, so the key is to protect this pawn and use it to win the game. So I played the move f6, so that when he goes king here, now I can play the move e5. He played pawn takes, pawn takes. He starts to push, but there's no danger here. 2 on 2 can never create a pass pawn. So we bring the king, we bring the king, we push the king back, we bring the king, we push the king back, and we just prepare to create the wall. So we're eventually just going to push forward, bring the king, create a new wall, push forward, bring the king, create a new wall, and eventually once the king is stuck on the back rank, the 3 pawns here, one of them will be able to promote, and oftentimes you promote with checkmate. Meanwhile, these 2 pawns over here are doing absolutely nothing. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. After the game, I felt very calm and collected. It was really interesting. The mindset that I try and use before I go into each game is always a little bit different. Kind of like trying on different hats. And for this game, I told myself, I'm going to try and make this game as long as possible. My goal was, so I was playing a person who was about 2100 rated. He was a little bit lower rated than I was. And my goal was simply, I think he's going to take more time than I am per each move. And so my goal was simply to stretch the game out as long as possible. So I had no intention of jumping into any tactics. Granted, when I saw them, I decided to play them. But I had no intentions of trying to get overly aggressive. I had no intention of trying to trade off the pieces as soon as possible. I just wanted the game to last a really long time and to really enjoy it. And it seemed to be a very good mentality because, to be honest, I stopped really thinking. I mean, I was calculating, but I really stopped like being in my own head, being worried about my moves and things like that by probably like move 15, and I just started to enjoy the position, and when the game was over, I was like, wow, I feel like I played amazing. Probably because I just enjoyed the whole process. So that's why I thought I'd share this with you guys, and so I hope you guys enjoyed that. See you next time. Take care.